So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ASE US seminars, and especially welcome Roman Carrasco from the Department of Biological Sciences, National University of Singapore. Roman received his PhD in environmental research from Imperial College London and is an associate professor at NUS. He heads the Bioecon Lab, which identifies strategies for reconciling biodiversity conservation, food security, and economic development in tropical regions. Roman's research group uses an interdisciplinary approach where biological models are linked to economics through bioeconomic modeling, and his research topics cover tropical forest conservation, trade-offs between agriculture and ecosystem services, and benefits to humans from nature. So for today's talk, Roman will be sharing more about his research on benefits of nature to people in Singapore. This work is conducted with the Natural Capital Project Singapore, which partners the National Parks Board, and it investigates how nature can be beneficial for a whole host of reasons. And today, Roman will be sharing with us more about this research and also how nature can be the spice of life in this climate in Singapore. So thanks very much, Roman, for being here. Very excited to have you.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, everyone, for the invite. You can hear me okay, right?
We can hear you okay.
Okay, yeah, it's great to be here and see so many familiar faces and names. And I learned that Dan Richards presented last week. So I guess this talk follows nicely from Dan's because it's related. We are in the same project and we are looking more at the side, at the people side, the demand side of ecosystem services. So first I want to share with you a small framework to place the different pieces of research that I will be presenting. So this will be the typical framework for ecosystem services. So we will have nature, you can see my pointer, and then nature will provide services to people. So another way to see this is that we have nature will be the supply of ecosystem services, and then people will place some demand on those ecosystem services. So for example, think of Bukit Nature Reserve. So it supplies a range of services, and one of them will be the opportunity to go hiking, to carry out some recreational activities within the park. So we will have people in Singapore will want to go on a hike, will want to go and de-stress in nature, or just to go for a run or do some physical activity. And then we will have the demand and the supply. The demand and the supply need to meet each other, and to get them to meet, we need to have some investments, some co-production, right? Probably that will involve having some trails in the reserve so that it's more accessible, it's easier to move around. We will also need roads. People will probably need to take a car or take a taxi to reach to the reserve. So once all those ingredients are there, we have the supply, we have the demand, and we have the right co-production to get them to meet, we have benefits, right? People go there, go on a hike, they de-stress, probably as a result, they will have lower levels of blood pressure, or that might contribute to lower some of the non-communicable diseases that are the highest causes of mortality in Singapore. So that's the ideal situation. Now with climate change, it might threaten this supply and demand connection. So for example, it might become, we could hypothesize it will become too hot, or we might have some droughts, and then the nature reserve might not be so appealing. So that might affect the demand. People might choose not to go and spend time in nature. On the other hand, climate change might mean that the ecosystem is affected, and then it might not have the right functional levels to provide the different services that it provides. So as a result, the supply might be smaller, the demand might be smaller, and eventually what we have is lower benefits. So we might end up having people that are less happy, physically and mentally less healthy as a result of climate change. Okay, so as I was saying, nature provides many ecosystem services, and this is some research conducted by Fairul, and within the Natural Capital Project, we ran a national survey, and then we try to understand what were the preferences of people for different ecosystem services. I'm highlighting here some of the services that are regarded as most important, like attracting foreign investment, branding of Singapore as a city in a garden, tourism, recreation. These services can be affected under climate change on the demand side. So we want to be able to attract all these people if Singapore becomes too hot to not in the right living conditions. Mental health, physical health, the respondents perceive that these are very important services provided by nature in Singapore. Singapore has a fast pace of life, so it's nice to see some greenery, to be around greenery, to de-stress, to restore yourself. But that might be affected by climate change as well. And then we have other important services like coastal defense, flood control, water regulation, temperature reduction, air pollution. If we don't have a healthy ecosystem, resilient ecosystems to climate change, those functions might drop. And as a result, we lose some valuable ecosystem services. Okay, so this is just going back to the framework and see how we are going to have ecosystem services on the supply side. And I mind that Dan has been telling you about some of the modeling done on the supply side of ecosystem services in Singapore. And then we might also have drops on the demand side. So as a result, our benefits to ecosystem services will drop. Okay, so I'm presenting you the framework, but obviously there are many assumptions in this framework and that will need to be tested first. And typically these assumptions, these foundational assumptions are tested in temperate countries. And there's no much work done on the benefits that nature provides to people in urban areas in the tropics. And yeah. So that's what we have been trying to do, trying to establish some of these relationships, trying to see whether these connections exist. One interesting connection that we were keen to explore was how the presence of nature, the availability of different land uses will be related to the level of exercising that an individual going to conduct in Singapore. This is work led by Claudia Tan. And what we did was to engage a market research company, and we deploy a survey stratified by income and different zoning in Singapore and land use types and ethnicity and age. And then we were trying to analyze the survey linking into the different frequency and duration of exercise of individuals and the type of exercise, and then the availability of different type of green spaces around their home address. So the hypothesis here is that there will be certain land uses that will be associated to exercising. Okay, so just to show you a snapshot of the results. So we have 4 categories here for overall exercise. We find an interesting interaction, and it's like a sweet spot for people to want to exercise, which is when you have the presence of water bodies within 250 meters from your home, and the presence of this land use type called a shrub, herbaceous land use type with a semi-closed canopy. So if you come to think about it, it kind of makes sense. It's an ideal setting for exercise. I don't know if you guys like running. To me, the ideal setting for running is I can look at a water body and I get some shade. That's a very nice condition to exercise, both for restoration when you look at the water body, also because it's quite cooling to be under the shade. So that induces overall exercise, which is a category that includes everything. This is related to individual-based exercise, which is driving it. You get this interaction as well, and typically individual exercise will be running. When we isolate walking, then the water body doesn't matter too much, but having managed parks nearby seems to be related to the frequency of walking. However, for team sports, we find that, for example, the combination of tree cover and managed vegetation parks is not ideal for team sports, which is kind of expected. So yeah, just to look at the interactions a bit more. So here you have how as the presence of water body increases, you see that the exercising frequency goes up as the percentage cover of shrubs within 250-meter buffer of your home address. And the same with the presence of water and shrubs on individual exercising. So it's interesting. It's not just the typical, you have a park nearby. It's also you need this right mix, right, of water body and a bit of shade in Singapore is ideal to induce exercising, we hypothesize. So yeah, there are right mixes of combination of land use for exercising. And however, trees are not ideal for team sports. Yeah, if you come to think about it, if you are chasing a frisbee, you don't want to crash into a tree. And yeah, so it is interesting to confirm some of these expectations that we have. And this is important. If having a good supply of parks, and I think that's what the government has trying to ensure, it's important to keep people active and through that we get a lot of benefits in reducing obesity, diabetes, and non-communicable diseases. So important role of nature there. And another important connection that has been established in temperate countries is that the higher your nature dose tends to be linked to life satisfaction. So touching here a bit on mental health. So we wanted to verify this in Singapore. So again, this is the national survey I was describing, and then we have a large part of the survey is trying to estimate the nature dose. The nature dose is messy because it can come in many different ways. So we get nature dose through direct interactions, like going to the park. So we need to ask how frequently you go to the park, what type of park, how long do you spend there. But we also get a lot of our nature dose. In fact, this might be the most, in terms of quantity, the biggest nature dose that we get is through the window. So if you have a window view of a green space from work, from home, that enhances a lot your nature dose. And then we try to link that with life satisfaction scale, right? So my life is close to an ideal. I wouldn't change my life. This is a very important metric to get an idea of how happy is the population. So the hypothesis that we could propose from the literature, mostly in temperate countries, would be that higher nature dose would be associated with life satisfaction, right? Okay, so these are some of the results, and Singapore is not as straightforward as we might think in temperate countries. We find something that we didn't expect, but it's interesting. We find that is not so much the nature dose per se, is the diversity of the dose that you get. So when I mean diversity, means that you tend to visit a range of different green and blue species, right? So you go to the beach, you go to the nature reserve, you go to the neighborhood park, you go to rooftop garden, you spend some time in the community garden. That diversity is linked with life satisfaction. It's true, we find a small effect as well for the duration, the nature dose, and in this case, we find, if you are familiar with the literature, there tends to be a threshold effect. So we find a small threshold here with 1 hour. So beyond 1 hour of time spent in green spaces, you can see there is an increase in your life satisfaction. So yeah, there was a hint for a threshold effect. We also proposed models with different thresholds for duration of time in nature, and indeed a model that has this 1 hour threshold then is linked to higher life satisfaction. So if you think from the perspective of a doctor that is trying to recommend a patient something to enhance the life satisfaction, the recommendation would be, okay, at least 1 hour a week in contact with green spaces. And then, so after with the threshold model, this was the result that we found, and it was again the annual diversity of the types of green spaces and blue spaces that you have contact with. And then we found this interaction that was interesting, that is not common in the literature, is the nature relatedness matters to the effect of the nature dose. This means that a person that has a high nature relatedness, a high connection with nature, so someone that understands nature, has a frequent exposure to nature, is going to benefit more when going to the nature reserve, when going to the park, than a person that doesn't have this connection with nature. Mechanisms, we don't know. I would hypothesize that if you go to a nature reserve, you are able to identify some species, and you are able to understand the complexity of what you are seeing, you are going to gain more, right? You get more excited about it. So that could explain this little boost for a higher nature relatedness. So these are unusual findings that make Singapore a bit different to what we would expect from Europe or the US. So some take-home messages would be that it's not as simple as just nature dose. What we are finding in Singapore is that it's also the diversity of the green and blue spaces that you visit that is linked to your life satisfaction. My guess here is that this is because Singapore has a saturated level of supply of nature, right? So just now looking through my window, I can see these fantastic trees, and you know that even if you are not looking to be in contact with nature, just crossing the road, you are likely to be some cool bird. You are likely to feel immersed in nature, right? So this is part of the urban planning of Singapore. So my guess is that when we have such a high background nature dose level, we're not going to find a big difference as opposed to other cities that might have a much more disaggregated, segmented allocation of nature. So those people that don't seek nature in cities like London or Madrid, they might have a lower life satisfaction. But I think in Singapore, even if you don't seek nature, you get a certain background nature dose. So that's my hypothesis. And then again, diversity matters. So it's wild nature, managed park, beaches, that's to life satisfaction. This correlation, this is not causation. So it could well be that if you have a high life satisfaction, you are quite happy with your life, you are a very active person, you end up going to many places, right? So and you end up wanting to spend some time the beach, and then you want to go to the nature reserve, you have a very active agenda. So yeah, it could be the reverse causal direction. And then something I didn't show you in the results, but I think it's interesting, the view from the window and at work is quite important for life satisfaction. So if tomorrow you are choosing to where to buy your flat, your house, yeah, make sure you have a nice nature view from the window, because it's been shown that it really plays a role on our psychological well-being to be able to see greenery from our window. Okay, so we have established that yes, nature contributes to Singaporeans in important ways. Now we were saying before that we are worried that under climate change with higher temperatures, people might not want to go to the parks. So we might lose some of the benefits that nature provides. Is this really happening? So in this analysis, we change gears a little bit, and we use mobile phone data in which the users are tracked. And we focus on Bukit Nature Reserve. And then we had a time series of data and try to relate different weather patterns to see whether that influenced the decision to go to the nature reserve, to Bukit and the time they spent in Bukit-Timah. So our hypothesis is that if it's a very hot day, there will be a drop. People will not go to the nature reserve. Will choose to go to the shopping mall instead. We thought that rainfall and wind were not going to be so relevant in Singapore. Okay, so this is some work with Sintel data. They have this subsidiary called NParks that do pretty cool APIs that allow you to collect data on how people move in Singapore. I recommend it. It's very good fun. And the data look like this. This is the typical time series, and then you see these up and downs are the weekend effect, the public holiday effect. The people go much more to Bukit-Timah during the weekend. And this mobile phone data can be broken down in ethnicities, and I think also will tell you the origin, which region of Singapore they started their travel before going to Bukit-Timah Nature Reserve. They have very clever ways to do this. I think the time that your mobile phone, where it rests at night, allows them to infer that that's your address. So you are sleeping, right? You're home, and now they know that you are moving at this speed toward Bukit-Timah Nature Reserve. So it's a very high detailed information. Of course, we get it aggregated for confidential reasons, but still it's very useful to understand patterns. Okay, so these are some of the models. We have a model for number of visitors, which we link to the decision to go to the Bukit-Timah. And then we have a model for the stay time. So how long they spend in Bukit-Timah Nature Reserve, which is something that might involve different type of decisions. And then we create some piecewise regression models to try to see at what temperature the relationship might break. This is because thermal comfort literature suggests that there is some barriers, and when we hit that barrier in terms of temperature or humidity, it becomes too uncomfortable, and we might not want to be there. Okay, so these are some of the results, and just to tell you that we didn't find what we were expecting to find. It was much more complicated, so the results are a bit messy. Obviously, there is a very clear holidays in red here effect. So weekend effect is very clear. And then with the temperature, we found that the most supported threshold agree with the thermal comfort temperature. It's 31.7 degrees. Is this threshold that after that it becomes too hot. But what we find is that as temperature increase, more people go to the nature reserve below the threshold. Beyond the threshold, we don't find any relationship. So we expect to see numbers decreasing, but no, it becomes flat. So I guess when it's hotter, it looks more appetizing to go to the nature reserve to spend. You see a sunny day, you want to go there. In terms of the stay time, what we find is that as the temperature increase below the threshold, for some regions, people tend to stay less there, right? So we assume that you are walking, it's a hot day, you get tired earlier, right? So you wanna go back, go to a place with aircon faster. So in this sense, here temperature might be playing a role. However, in regions that are far from Bukit-Timah Nature Reserve, like Northeast East region, even if it's very hot, people will stay a bit longer. So I think if you incur some travel cost to Bukit-Timah Nature Reserve, and it's your Saturday, and that's the plan for your Saturday, you are gonna stay longer even if it's hot. Also, we find that the time spent in Bukit-Timah Nature Reserve is shorter during weekends. Probably is people that are doing different things, or maybe because it's more crowded and people want to leave. So yeah, temperature is relevant for the duration of time, but it's complicated. It depends on where you come from. But it doesn't seem so relevant in the decision to go to the nature reserve. So in that sense, it's not as what we expected. And then if you come from far, then you're gonna tahan and stay there even if it's hot. Okay, so that was interesting. The next thing we wanted to answer is, and this is Wang Zhang also conducted this research, is whether Singaporeans do really value parks, and whether what would be the dollar value that they will put to a new park right next to their house, and what characteristics will that park have for it to be valuable. So this was a survey, a smaller one, around 400, and we use discrete choice modeling, which is a very interesting technique to understand the preferences of people, so that we can put some willingness to pay value to it. And then we created these different sets that they could choose from, and we have a small talk, right? The Singapore government has a new scheme to put a new neighborhood park near you. However, you're going to have to pay some conservancy fees for this park, right? So we try to make it sound realistic, and so that we get an idea of how will people choose. And then they have to choose between different sets, right? This is an example. They have to choose among many sets, and that will help us later fit the models. Okay, so the park is going to help then either to reduce air pollution or might contribute to air pollution, perhaps through pollen. The park is going to have some cooling services. It's going to reduce the temperature. It's going to reduce the noise. It's going to provide some biodiversity, enhance number of species, richness, and then there will be other aspects, right? Like how far is the park and how much you have to pay for the park. So they keep choosing, and then we fit the models to that. And this is the result of the model. It's something that we will expect. Singapore is being hot. The willingness to pay is highest for parks that can reduce temperature, right? So we're talking about if the park is able to reduce 2 degrees, something like $10 per month. If the park has some community education activities, they value it. And in the park is able to reduce air pollution, they're also they are willing to pay for that, right? And as expected, the value of the park will decrease the farthest away is the park from their house, because they have to incur some travel costs. There was a positive effort by diversity, but we couldn't find it significant. So this, I'm going to show you now a different discrete choice experiment for a nature reserve, not a neighborhood park next to the house. In this case, the bird richness became significant. So we are thinking here is that Singaporeans might have a different perception of having a park right next to their house. So having perhaps more miners or a little bit of wildlife conflict, maybe that is what prevented us from finding it significant. But when you talk about a park that might not be more for nature reserve purposes, for protected area, then the value biodiversity as well. The facilities in the park also matter. Something interesting here, when the park is too crowded, it has less value for Singapore. So that's something also interesting for urban planning. You want to make sure that your park is not going to get overcrowded, or it will lose a part of its value. So take-home messages, and probably this is not news. Cooling services are very important. Air pollution reduction services is very important. And then bird richness is more appreciated, especially if we are talking about a nature reserve. So yeah, that confirms that Singapore parks are value, and they fetch an economic value. And this is all well and good, and all these correlational analysis are interesting. I think it brings some insights, but we wanted to be able to infer some causality. We want to have a bit more control of what's going on. So we carry out some experiments in open conditions. This is led by Le Nguyen, and this was allowing us to go a bit deeper into the relationship between perceived biodiversity and psychological well-being. So the idea is that if you are if you are hiking and you encounter some exciting creature, you're going to have more boost in your mood than if you don't find this exciting creature. Okay, so what we did here, and we were in the middle of doing it, but then COVID came and then we couldn't continue. So we had to stop at a sample size of 200. So we engage NUS students and we just allocate them to 8 different trails with a gradient of naturalness. So we have from urban trails that don't have a lot of greenery to up to primary forest. And then we release them at the beginning of the trail, and then we measure before what is the positive effect and negative effect, the positive, negative emotions, and their restorativeness levels. These positive and negative effects are linked to things like stress, anxiety, depression, and mental health in general. So they are quite important psychological metrics. And then we ask them, how many species did you see? So we are measuring the perceived diversity that they measure. And then we use structural equation models to try whether, and this was an hypothesis that our collaborators from psychology, they wanted to test whether perceived biodiversity had an effect on restorativeness that itself had an effect on positive affect. So in this case, it's like we first need to feel restored to later on have positive emotions, right? So that was the hypothesis. Okay, so there are some pictures of the trails. So these are 2 trails, secondary forests in Windsor Nature Park. Then we have some manicure trails, some neighborhood parks, and then we have some urban trails. And then we have also some trails in the Botanic Gardens, is the primary forest, secondary forest, another manicure trail. And then we have another urban trail that is, instead of tall buildings, we have more like landed properties. Okay, so these are the results of the structural equation model. And indeed, our psychology, our collaborators from psychology were right. The perceived restorativeness is mediating the effect of diversity. In this case, the model picks animal diversity contributes to positive emotions through restoring the students participating in the trails. Crowdness level, how many people they encounter in the trail, has a negative effect. So they don't have as higher positive emotions when the trail is too crowded. With negative emotions is the flip side of the coin. So more diversity is associated with more restoration itself has less negative emotions. And then notice also the role of nature relatedness. So those students that have a connection with nature benefit more in terms of positive emotions. So we thought initially people that never go to the park, they're gonna be very excited because it will be like a new thing, like, wow, you see, I saw this, I saw that. But that turned out not to be the case. It seems that those that go frequently are the ones that really find more peace and find more positive emotions when they go to the park. So in that case, this is I guess our stumbling block, right? How do we get people that don't go to the park to go more to the park and to reap the benefits and to benefit? So this seems to be a theme in some of the analysis that we are doing. These are the random intercepts of the model, just to give you an idea of what was the contribution of the different trails per se. So something that we expect, right? So the primary, secondary forest, manicure park tend to have a positive random intercept. They contribute to the increase in the positive emotions, and the urban the urban trails tend to have a negative contribution. They lower the positive emotions. Okay, so yeah, this was interesting. We found that the perceived animal species richness is contributing to positive emotions and reducing negative emotions. So it's not just about, as most of the literature will do, I have a green space, I go to the park. It's also the species that they are in the park, and that's also important. So this is interesting because to me, coming from conservation science, when I can establish a link between biodiversity and mental health, that's a pretty useful link to find. Okay, this is a bit unusual analysis, and I want to close with this one. So the question that we're trying to answer here, and this is Chia-Cheng Chang led this one, was trying to move from the nature dose framework. We always say like, oh, you go to nature more, you have more life satisfaction, or you are more healthy, or you are more happy. That's great, right? But we know that life is not about quantity. Life is sometimes about this punctual day, this spark, this spike, right? And we were saying, oh, maybe it's about nature being in those key fondest memories in our life, right? So when we think fondest memories, it could be those holidays that we took with our best friends, right? Your favorite holiday memories, or it could be your wedding, or it could be your honeymoon, or it could be that fun day that you had with your cousins. So we're asking, okay, when you tag a photo as fun, or when you tag a photo as honeymoon in the social media, is it more likely that you are in a place that contains nature or not? That was the question, right? So we don't know what to expect. Maybe when you tag fun, the photos tend to be linked to a shopping mall behind you, right? Or maybe it could be nature, right? Okay, so this was the idea to collect photos from social media. We use Flickr, which have geotagged located photos, and then we run some image identification neural network to be able to identify what's in the photo. I mean, having done by hand, but it will be a huge effort. But now we have things like this Google Cloud Vision API has a neural network analyzing the photos for us. So for every photo, we can know the tag of the user, which country it was produced, and then we can run it through the Google API, and it will tell us whether the photo contains nature elements and which elements or what are, and then we can run it globally for 185 countries. Okay, so this is how it works. You run it through the Google API, and this is, I have to give credit to Dan Richards that introduced us to this fantastic protocol, and then you will get different labels in the photo. So it's pretty interesting to understand whether nature plays a role in the holidays of people worldwide. Okay, so these are some of the results, and we are comparing the baseline of the model here are photos that are tagged with the tags daily or routine. So what we do on a normal day. So when the photo is tagged with fun or with a honeymoon or with vacation, they tend to have nature elements significantly more than when they are tagged with daily or routine. So elements could be plant, landscape, or in general nature, water, animal. However, when the photo is tagged with wedding, there is a bit of a, yeah, sometimes it's more, but sometimes it's less. So it's not so clear. Perhaps you cannot get animals inside a wedding. And if you are talking about celebrations in general, it can be even less than daily routines. So it's not as neat in those cases. But as you can see, the association of nature as a background of your photos and vacations and honeymoons is quite clear compared to daily activities. And then Chia-Cheng said, okay, I'm curious now. I want to regress countries' proportion of nature as the background of their fun photos with the life satisfaction score of the countries. And funny enough, if you regress the proportion of photos that are tagged as fun and are linked to nature at the background, they correlate nicely with the life satisfaction score of countries. So, I mean, obviously this is just a wild correlation, but it's interesting. Perhaps countries that have this tradition of having fun outdoors, they also get to have a higher life satisfaction. So take-home messages, yes, I think this is showing that when it comes to our fondest memories, to our honeymoon, our vacation, our holidays, when we are having fun, we tend to have nature around us. It's just a correlation, but it's interesting to find that. Why not for weddings, which we expected to find? So our guess is that when it comes to wedding planning, it's not the individual deciding, right? So I might want to do my wedding in the middle of a park, but I'm sure that my in-laws will not be very happy with that, right? They will have, well, actually, they will have a grumble if I say, okay, let's have a wedding in the middle of Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, right? And so that might mean that people have to choose weddings that are convenient, wedding locations convenient for the guests. Okay, so just general conclusions. Yeah, we find that nature matters for Singaporeans. Nature is linked to life satisfaction. The right mix of land uses are linked to exercising. And yes, biodiversity seems to be the spice of life, at least when it came to our students that we release in the trails. And nature could reduce the time that people spend outdoors, but it was not that clear. So all in all, I think through careful urban planning, we can reap, optimize the benefits, the physical and health benefits that we can get from nature. And I think that's, we are speaking here of big money and reducing disease burdens that are very large. Okay, and all credit to these guys that are the leaders of the papers that I presented to you. Thank you very much.